It was the flash bulb that blinded her, but it was the shove that opened her eyes. One moment, Vivian Sterling was standing on the precipice of everything she'd ever been told to want: a shimmering gown, a billionaire husband, and their first child growing safely inside her. The next, she was stumbling cast aside from the perfect family portrait by the very man who had created it with her. The camera caught everything. The cold indifference on his face, the shock on hers, the couture-clad crowd gasping behind them. They thought they were witnessing a moment of celebrity scandal. They had no idea they were watching the first tremor of an earthquake that would bring an empire to its knees. This isn't just a story about a ruined photo. It's the story of what happened the next day, when she appeared on the front page alone. The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was thick with the scent of money and tuberose. It was the annual Sterling Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of New York City's philanthropic calendar, and Vivian Sterling felt like an imposter in her own life. Her gown, a custom-made masterpiece by Oscar de la Renta in a shade of sapphire that matched her eyes, felt more like a costume than a dress. The weight of the sterling diamonds around her neck was a constant cold reminder of the gilded cage she now inhabited. 6 months pregnant, she rested a protective hand on the gentle swell of her belly. This child, a boy they already knew would be named Julian Sterling Jr., was supposed to be the bridge between her world and his. Her world had been one of dusty art history archives, the quiet thrill of discovering a forgotten masterpiece and a small sunlit apartment in Brooklyn. His was this, a universe of flashing cameras, whispered stock tips, and the crushing expectations of a dynasty built on steel and shrewd investments. Her husband, Julian Sterling, was holding court near the ice sculpture of a swan, a flute of champagne in his hand. He drank even if she couldn't. He was devastatingly handsome, with the kind of chiseled jawline and effortless charm that made photographers swoon and competitors underestimate him. When she had first met him at a gallery opening, he had seemed different. He'd listened, truly listened, as she spoke passionately about the brushstrokes of a minor impressionist painter. He had pursued her with a relentless, dizzying intensity that had swept her off her feet. Now, 2 years into their marriage, that intensity was often directed elsewhere, at his phone, his board members, and increasingly at his mother. Eleonora Sterling, a woman who looked as though she were carved from marble and disapproval, was observing the room from her self-appointed throne, a velvet armchair near the stage. Her gaze swept over the crowd, missing nothing, and when it landed on Vivian, it always seemed to carry a silent, withering critique. The dress is too tight. The girl is too common. The pregnancy is her only saving grace. Darling Julian's voice cut through her thoughts. He was suddenly by her side, his hand on the small of her back. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was a maneuver. The Times is here. We need the shot. He steered her towards the designated photo area, a wall of lush white roses and an artfully placed Sterling Foundation logo. The photographers, who had been lazily snapping pictures of socialites, straightened up their lenses, focusing like a pack of hungry wolves. Julian Vivian. "Over here," they shouted. Vivian forced a smile, the muscles in her face feeling stiff. She stood beside Julian, her hand instinctively going back to her belly. It was their first major public appearance since announcing the pregnancy, and the narrative was supposed to be perfect. The tech billionaire and his glowing art historian wife cementing the future of the Sterling line. "Big smiles, love, Julian," murmured his own smile, a brilliant practiced thing that didn't reach his eyes. The flashbulbs erupted in a blinding, disorienting volley. Vivian blinked against the glare, trying to hold her pose. "Julian," Can we get one of just you?" "For the business section," a gruff voice called out. It was a plant, a request they had likely pre-arranged. "Of course," Julian said smoothly. Vivian started to take a half step back to give him the spotlight as she had been taught, but she wasn't moving fast enough for him. "Move, Vivian!" He hissed the words, a venomous whisper meant only for her. And then it happened. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a firm, impatient shove. His hand, the same one that wore the wedding band she'd placed on it, pushed her out of the frame. Thrown off balance by the shift in her center of gravity due to the pregnancy, Vivian stumbled. Her heel caught on the hem of her gown, and for one terrifying, heart-stopping moment, she thought she was going to fall. She managed to catch herself on a velvet rope stanchion, her hands trembling as she straightened up. The ballroom, which had been a cacophony of chatter and clinking glasses, fell into a stunned, momentary silence. The only sound was the frantic, merciless clicking of a single photographer's camera. Someone who had realized the real story wasn't the posed shot, but the candid, brutal moment of her dismissal. Vivian's face burned with a humiliation so profound it felt like a physical blow. She looked at Julian. He hadn't even turned to see if she was all right. He was already posing, one hand in the pocket of his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, bathed in the adoring light of the flashes. He was in his element, and she had just been an inconvenient accessory. From across the room, she saw Eleonora Sterling's expression. There was no shock, no concern. There was only a flicker of something that looked chillingly like satisfaction. In that instant, the gilded cage shattered. Vivian saw it for what it was. Not a home, but a prison. And she had just been pushed out the door. Without a word, clutching what was left of her dignity, she turned and walked away from the flashing lights from her husband, and from the life she now knew was a beautiful, elaborate lie. Her stilettos, once a symbol of glamour, now felt like shackles she couldn't wait to unlace. Each step through the stunned crowd was a step towards an unknown future, the only certainty being the tiny, innocent life she was carrying. The bridge she thought she was building had just been burned down by its chief architect. The taxi ride back to the Fifth Avenue penthouse was a blur of streetlights and tears. Vivian paid the driver with a crumpled $100 bill from her clutch, not waiting for the change. The doorman, Michael, a kind man with grandchildren of his own, looked at her with undisguised concern. "Mrs. Sterling, are you all right? Mr. Sterling isn't with you." "I'm fine, Michael. Just a headache." She lied the words, tasting like ash. The penthouse was silent and cavernous. It had always felt more like a corporate showroom than a home curated by a designer. Eleonora had chosen filled with sterile white furniture and imposing abstract art that Julian had bought as an investment, not for love. Her own small, cherished paintings were relegated to a back hallway as if they were embarrassing relatives. She stripped off the sapphire gown, letting it pool on the floor like a deflated dream. In the shower, she scrubbed at her skin, trying to wash away the feeling of Julian's hand on her back. The sting of public humiliation, the cold triumph in his mother's eyes. But it was a stain on the inside. She was toweling her hair when she heard the key in the door. Julian. She braced herself, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. He walked into their bedroom, loosening his bow tie. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sorry. He looked irritated, as if she were a minor inconvenience he now had to deal with. "That was quite the dramatic exit, Vivian," he said, tossing his jacket onto a chair. "You pushed me. she said, her voice quiet but steady. He finally looked at her, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Oh, for God's sake. I nudged you. You were in the way and you were blocking the light. The photographer from the Times business section needed a solo shot. It's about the brand. You're supposed to understand that." The brand, she repeated the words, incredulous. "I'm 6 months pregnant with your son, Julian. I almost fell. And you're talking about the brand. Don't be hysterical." He sighed, a line he used often, a line designed to make her feel small and irrational. "Nothing happened. You're fine. The baby's fine. You created a scene over nothing." He started unbuttoning his shirt, his back to her. "My mother is furious. You embarrass the family. I embarrass the family." The dam of her composure broke. "You shoved your pregnant wife in front of 200 people and a dozen photographers. And I'm the embarrassment." "I have a board meeting at 7 a.m., he said, his voice cold and final. "I'm sleeping in the guest suite. We can discuss your overreaction when I'm not on the verge of closing the biggest deal of my career. Good night." He walked out, closing the door behind him with a soft click that echoed the closing of a tomb. There was no apology, no remorse, only dismissal. Vivian stood there, trembling, the wet towel clutched in her hand. The biggest deal of his career. The phrase snagged in her mind. It was always a deal, a merger, a launch. She and their son were just supporting characters in the grand drama of Julian Sterling's ambition. Sleep was immassible. She spent the night staring at the city lights, her mind racing. The love she'd felt for Julian had been eroding for months, chipped away by 1,000 small cruelties, 1,000 moments of dismissiveness. But the shove had been a seismic event. It had laid bare the truth: she was not his partner. She was a prop. At 6 a.m., a new kind of dread settled in. The papers, the gossip sites. She knew what she would find. Her phone, which she'd silenced, began to buzz incessantly on the nightstand. She finally picked it up. Dozens of texts, missed calls from her few real friends, her sister. The top of her newsfeed was a nightmare. Page 6, Sterling family drama. Billionaire Julian Sterling. Shoves pregnant wife. Vivian at Met Gala. The Daily Mail. The shove felt round the world, inside the cracks of a billionaire marriage. The articles featured the damning photo. It was worse than she could have imagined. Caught in stark, high-definition clarity was the moment of impact. Julian's face was a mask of cold ambition, his eyes fixed on the photographers ahead. Her own face was a canvas of shock-hurt and disbelief. Her hand was protectively on her stomach, a detail that made the act seem 10 times more monstrous. She felt sick. But it was a notification from her email that truly changed everything. It was a stock alert she'd set up months ago, a small act of trying to understand Julian's world. Stock alert. Sterling Innovations. Stin down 8% in pre-market trading. An 8% drop was significant. It wasn't just about a PR scandal. The market was reacting. It was then that Julian's words came back to her. The biggest deal of my career. It couldn't just be about a photo. Something else was going on. Driven by a desperate need to understand, she walked into Julian's home office. It was a space she rarely entered, his private sanctuary of chrome and black leather. His laptop was on the desk, open. He had been so sure of her meekness, so confident in her lack of interest in his business. that he hadn't even bothered to close it. Her heart pounded. This was a violation of trust, but she realized with a bitter pang that trust had already been annihilated. Her hands trembling, she touched the trackpad. The screen flickered to life. No password. His arrogance was her key. His email was open. She started scrolling, her stomach twisting into knots. There were chains of frantic emails between him, his CFO, and his mother. From Eleonora Sterling to Julian Sterling. Subject: damage control. Julian. This is a catastrophe. The girl's little stunt has wiped nearly $1 billion off our valuation overnight. The Monroes will get spooked. Fix this. I don't care how. Remind her of the terms of the prenuptial agreement. Silence her. The Monroes. Isabella Monroe, his childhood friend, the daughter of Robert Monroe, the CEO of Monroe Corp., a sprawling global conglomerate. Isabella was everything. Vivian was not born to wealth, impeccably connected, a woman Eleonora had always openly adored. Vivian kept digging, and then she found it. A folder on the desktop labeled Project Nightingale. It sounded poetic. The contents were brutal. It was a draft of a merger agreement. Sterling Innovations, despite its public image of meteoric success, was in trouble. They had over-leveraged on a new AI venture that was failing bleeding money at an alarming rate. The company was a glittering facade close to collapse. The merger with the Titan Monroe Corp wasn't just a deal, it was a lifeline. It was the only thing that could save Julian from ruin. She read further, her blood turning to ice. She scrolled down to the annexes, the fine print. And there, in cold, legalistic language, was a clause titled Familial Alliance Protocol. The successful execution of this merger is contingent upon the formal and public consolidation of the Sterling and Monroe family interests. This will be cemented via the marital union of Julian Sterling and Isabella Monroe within 6 months of the deal's finalization. It was all there. A contract to trade his wife. Her. The shove. The dismissal. The fury from his mother. It wasn't about a ruined photo or a PR gaffe. It was about a multi-billion-dollar deal that required him to be single, to be available to marry Isabella Monroe. Vivian and their unborn child were not just inconveniences, they were liabilities, obstacles to be removed. The public humiliation was likely the first step away to paint her as unstable, to lay the groundwork for a quick, quiet, and brutal divorce. She sank into his leather chair, the coldness seeping into her bones. The air left her lungs. She looked at the damning document on the screen. He wasn't just pushing her out of a photo. He was trying to erase her from his life, from the Sterling legacy, all to save himself. At that moment, her phone buzzed again. An unknown number. She almost ignored it, but some new steely instinct made her answer. "Is this Vivian Vance?" Sterling, a man's voice asked. It was calm, professional. "Who is this?" she asked, her own voice barely a whisper. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm an investigative journalist with the New York Sentinel. I saw what happened last night, Mrs. Sterling. And I have a feeling the real story isn't just about a shove. If you're willing to talk, I'm willing to listen. And I think the world should hear your side of the story." Vivian looked from the laptop screen with its evidence of a monstrous betrayal to the window overlooking the city. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the opulent room. They had pushed her out. They thought she would crumble. They had no idea they had just unleashed a force they could not control. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice now clear and cold as ice. Where and when do we meet? The meeting took place in a discreet corner of a coffee shop in the West Village, a world away from the polished austerity of Fifth Avenue. Vivian wore sunglasses and a simple trench coat, her hair pulled back. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet electrified by a terrifying sense of purpose. Marcus Thorne was older than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 50s, with kind eyes that had seen too much and a weary but determined set to his jaw. He didn't come with a recorder or a flashy notepad, just a small leather-bound journal and a pen. "Thank you for meeting me, Mrs. Sterling," he began, his voice low. "I want to be clear. My goal is not to write a salacious gossip piece. The photo of your husband pushing you is powerful, but what's more powerful is the why. People see a brute and a victim. I suspect the truth is far more complex." Vivian took a steadying breath. "Please call me Vivian. And Mrs. Sterling. That name feels foreign now." She looked at him, making a decision that would alter the course of her life. She was done being a victim. "You're right, Mr. Thorne. The shove was just a symptom. I have the disease." For the next 2 hours, she talked. She told him everything. She started with the fairy tale courtship, the subtle signs of control, the way she was slowly isolated from her old life. She described Eleonora's relentless campaign of psychological warfare, the constant undermining of her confidence and her worth. And then she told him about Project Nightingale. She didn't just tell him, she showed him. She had taken her phone and with trembling hands photographed every page of the draft merger agreement from Julian's laptop. The failing AI venture, the massive debt, and the hideous familial alliance protocol. Marcus Thorne listened, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to quiet outrage. He examined the photos of the documents on her phone, zooming in on the text. He didn't speak for a long time. "He was going to trade you," Marcus said, finally the words hanging in the air between them. "He was going to trade you and his unborn child for a corporate bailout. He was going to erase us." Vivian corrected her voice hard. "He and his mother planned to paint me as an unstable gold digger, use their army of lawyers to crush me with the prenup, and ride off with the Monroe fortune." The shove was step 1, public humiliation. Marcus leaned forward. This is explosive, Vivian. This goes beyond family drama. This is potential shareholder fraud. He's been misrepresenting the health of his company to the public and to his investors for months, if these numbers are accurate. "They are," she said. "He's been living on borrowed time and other people's money." "What do you want to happen?" Marcus asked gently. The question hung in the air. What did she want? Revenge, justice? An apology she knew would never come. She thought of the child inside her, a child who deserved a mother, not a martyr, a child who deserved to be free from the toxic legacy of the Sterling name. "I want security," she said, her voice gaining strength, "for me and my son. I want everyone to know the truth. Not the story Julian and Eleonora will spin, but the real unvarnished truth. They use their power and their image as weapons. I want to take those weapons away from them." Marcus nodded slowly, a glint of battle in his eyes. "All right, Vivian, I can do that. But you have to be prepared. They will come for you. They will try to discredit you, destroy your reputation. It will be ugly. They started this war," Vivian said, a single cold tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I intend to finish it." The next 24 hours were a blur of clandestine phone calls and encrypted emails. Vivian, guided by Marcus, connected with a powerhouse of a divorce attorney named Diana Finch, a woman notorious for eviscerating powerful men in the courtroom. Diana, upon hearing the story and seeing the evidence, took the case instantly, her voice practically vibrating with righteous fury over the phone. The prenup is ironclad, but it has a conduct clause, Diana had explained, and trying to leverage a public humiliation to fraudulently invalidate a marriage in service of a secret deal is about as bad as conduct gets. We're going to burn them to the ground. Vivian packed a single bag. She left the sapphire gown lying on the floor. She left the diamonds in their velvet box. The only thing of value she took with her was a small framed photo from her old life, a picture of her and her sister laughing on a beach long before the name Sterling had ever entered her vocabulary. She had Diana's paralegal deliver a formal letter of separation to the penthouse. Then she went dark, staying in a secure apartment hotel Diana had arranged. The next morning the story broke. It wasn't on page 6. It was on the front page of the New York Sentinel above the fold. The headline was devastating in its simplicity. Empire. Pregnant Sterling wife exposes husband's plot to trade family for fortune. Beneath it was not the photo of the shove. Instead, it was a beautiful, defiant portrait Marcus's photographer had taken of Vivian. She was looking directly into the camera, her expression not one of a victim, but of a woman in control. She was alone, strong, her hand resting on her belly, not in fear, but in promise. The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. Marcus Thorne laid out the entire sordid tale. He detailed the failing company, citing anonymous sources from within Sterling Innovations that he had clearly cultivated. He described the secret merger talks with Monroe Corp. And most damningly, he published excerpts from the Familial Alliance Protocol. He didn't need to state the implication. It was brutally clear. The story was framed around Vivian's narrative, a smart, accomplished woman lured into a toxic dynasty who found her strength when they tried to discard her and her child. It was a story of betrayal, but also one of empowerment. The fallout was instantaneous and nuclear. The stock for Sterling Innovations didn't just drop. It plummeted, triggering a halt in trading within the first hour. The SEC and the Southern District of New York both announced they were launching formal investigations into the company for securities fraud based on the Sentinel's reporting. Robert Monroe, CEO of Monroe Corp., released a terse statement announcing that all merger talks with Sterling Innovations had been terminated effective immediately. In the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, Julian and Eleonora Sterling woke up not to a PR problem, but to the complete and utter implosion of their world. Their carefully constructed image was shattered. Their lifeline was gone. Their name was now synonymous with deceit and cruelty. Vivian Sterling had been pushed out of their picture, so she had created her own. And that morning her face was on the front page alone, telling a story of truth and fire that had set their entire kingdom ablaze. The Sterling counterattack did not begin with a cannon blast, but with a quiet digital execution. It came 2 days after Vivian's story ignited a firestorm across the city. She was in a small independent bookstore in Greenwich Village, a sanctuary she'd sought to find a moment of peace. Her hand trembled slightly as she handed a worn copy of a poetry collection to the cashier. The simple act of buying a book felt like a reclamation of her old self. "That'll be $22.50, the cashier said with a smile. Vivian handed over the sleek black credit card, a card tied to a joint account, a card that could once have purchased the entire store without blinking. The cashier swiped it. A harsh, discordant beep echoed in the quiet shop. He swiped it again. "I'm sorry," he said, his smile faltering. "It's been declined." Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over Vivian. It was a public branding. She fumbled in her purse for some cash, her face burning. This wasn't just about money. It was a message. You are nothing without us. We are everywhere. We can cut you off from the world with a single keystroke. This was just the first shot in a war waged by an enemy with limitless resources and no moral compass. The full blitzkrieg was unleashed by a woman named Olivia Vance. Vance was not a lawyer. She was a cleaner, a crisis management expert, so ruthless and effective that the city's elite whispered her name like an incantation against scandal. Her strategy was simple and brutal: obliterate the accuser. Within hours, the narrative began to warp. The story was no longer just Billionaire's betrayal. New headlines, seeded by Vance's network of contacts, slithered onto gossip sites and even into the columns of more reputable papers. Page 6. Inside Vivian Sterling's erratic behavior. Friends. Worry about billionaire brides' spending and temper. The Daily Mail, from art, curator to agitator. Was Vivian Sterling's marriage a calculated climb from the start? They dug into her past, twisting a passionate debate with a former colleague into a history of professional instability. They painted her modest Brooklyn apartment as a sign of desperate ambition. Anonymous sources close to the family were quoted, expressing deep concern for her mental state. Her sister Chloe, who had flown in from Chicago on the first flight, read one of the articles aloud in their hotel room, her voice shaking with rage. Sources claim Vivian became increasingly isolated and paranoid after the wedding, prone to wild accusations. "They're calling you crazy, Vivian." "This is insane." Vivian was staring at her phone, scrolling through the comments section, a toxic swamp of strangers judging her, dissecting her, believing the lies. She felt the carefully constructed walls of her resolve begin to crack. Was this who she was? A hysterical, manipulative gold digger their poison was seeping in. Chloe gently took the phone from her hands. "No more. You don't read this filth. This is their weapon. It's not real." Then came the official statement from the Sterling family, a masterpiece of gaslighting penned by Olivia Vance herself. It was released to the Associated Press and ran everywhere. The Sterling family is heartbroken by the recent baseless allegations made by Vivian Sterling. While we have tried to handle this sensitive matter privately, her public actions have forced our hand. Vivian is a beloved member of our family, and it is with great sadness that we acknowledge she has been suffering from significant emotional distress. The pressures of her pregnancy, a joyous time that can also bring challenges, have unfortunately manifested in a series of paranoid delusions which have been cruelly exploited by an irresponsible media outlet seeking to profit from a private tragedy. Our family's primary and only concern is for Vivian's health and the well-being of her unborn child. We are pursuing all legal avenues to protect our family from these defamatory attacks. But more importantly, to get Vivian the medical and emotional help she so desperately needs. It was diabolically brilliant. It didn't deny, it expressed concern. It didn't attack, it offered help. It recast their monstrous behavior as a loving family's attempt to manage a mentally ill relative. That evening, Vivian felt a wave of despair so profound, it left her breathless. They were turning her truth into a sickness. She curled up on the hotel bed, a sob catching in her throat, feeling utterly alone in a city of millions. Then she felt it, a soft but distinct flutter from within, a tiny, insistent kick. It was a reminder. You are not alone. You are fighting for two. She placed both hands on her belly, and the fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They could attack her character, question her sanity, but they could not touch the truth of the life she carried. Her support system, her new family, galvanized around her. Chloe became her shield from the media. Marcus Thorne, the journalist, became her intelligence officer. "Don't let them get to you, Vivian," he said during a late-night call. "This is Vance's playbook. It's called Muddying the Waters. They create such a storm of lies and speculation that the public gets confused and loses sight of the original facts. But the facts are on our side. The SEC investigation is proceeding. They've subpoenaed Julian's personal communications. The corporate fraud is the anchor, and we are not going to let them distract from it." Her general in this war was Diana Finch. The lawyer was immune to the PR blitz. In her office, she laid out the Sterling strategy like a battlefield map. They are trying to accomplish two things. Diana explained, her tone clinical and calming. First, they are trying to break you psychologically, to make you doubt yourself, so you'll accept a low-ball settlement and sign an NDA to make it all go away. Second, they are building a public case to paint you as an unfit mother. That is their endgame, Vivian. They want to take your child. The words sent a chill down Vivian's spine, but hearing the strategy laid bare robbed it of its terrifying power. This wasn't personal. It was tactical. "What's our move?" Vivian asked. "We fight back in the only arena that matters, the law," Diana said. "They've filed an emergency motion to freeze all your assets, citing your instability. They want to starve you out. The hearing is tomorrow, and you are going to be there. They want me to look like a victim," Vivian said. "No," Diana corrected. "We want them to see you're a survivor, and we want the judge to see firsthand who the real unstable party is." The courtroom was a chamber of polished wood and hushed tension. Vivian walked in, head held high, and sat beside Diana. Across the aisle, Julian sat with his legal team, looking pale and gaunt. He wouldn't look at her. In the front row, directly behind him, sat Eleonora. She was the picture of icy, matriarchal concern, her expression one of profound, pained disappointment. It was a performance for the judge, and it was sickening. The Sterling's lead counsel, a slick lawyer named Corbin, argued their case with smooth confidence. He spoke of Vivian's profligate sending and presented a dossier from a private investigator detailing her erratic behavior, which amounted to little more than having dinner with old friends he painted as a disreputable crowd. "Your Honor," Corbin concluded, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "we are simply trying to protect the family's assets, and more importantly, protect Mrs. Sterling from herself until she can receive the care she needs." Then it was Diana's turn. She rose, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but resonant, "Mr. Corbin paints a compelling picture of a concerned family dealing with a troubled woman. It is a work of fiction. The only party in need of care here is the Sterling Empire, which is suffering from a terminal case of fraud." "Objection," Corbin snapped, jumping to his feet. "Sustained." "Stick to the motion, Ms. Finch, the judge," a no-nonsense woman named Atherton said wearily. "Gladly, Your Honor. The motion is about my client's alleged instability." "Let's talk about stability." Diana continued, her voice gaining power. Is it stable to physically shove your 6 months pregnant wife in front of a wall of photographers? Is it stable, Mr. Sterling? She turned to face him directly, and he shrank in his seat to then lie about it and try to convince her she imagined it. That is not care, Your Honor. That is abuse. That is gaslighting. She turned back to the judge. They speak of protecting assets. Is it financially prudent to run your publicly traded company as a personal slush fund, misrepresenting losses so catastrophically that your stock is now worthless, and you are the subject of a federal investigation? This isn't about protecting assets from my client. This is about Mr. Sterling trying to hide what's left of his assets from the SEC and his shareholders. She walked to her table and picked up a document. And finally, the crux of it. They claim my client is unstable because she revealed a family matter. But this was never a family matter. This was a business transaction. She held up the copy of the merger agreement. This is the contract in which Mr. Sterling agreed to marry another woman to secure a corporate bailout. This document, the Familial Alliance Protocol, is the source of all this instability. My client wasn't having a breakdown. Your Honor, she was having a revelation. She learned that her husband was planning to trade her and their unborn child like a commodity. Diana let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final blow. They are not freezing her assets to protect her. They are punishing her for refusing to be sold. Judge Atherton stared at Diana, then at the document she held. She looked at Julian's ashen face and Eleonora's mask of fury. She had seen enough. Motion denied. The judge declared, her voice sharp as a gavel. Furthermore, I am ordering Mr. Sterling to pay a temporary monthly support sum of $150,000 to Mrs. Sterling and cover 100% of her legal fees effective immediately. Financially crippling your pregnant wife while you're under federal investigation is a strategy I would strongly advise you to reconsider, Mr. Corbin. It was a total, unequivocal victory. As Vivian and Diana exited the courthouse, they were swarmed by reporters. But this time, Vivian didn't flinch. She looked directly into the cameras, her expression serene and resolute. The narrative had shattered. That evening, back in the quiet of the hotel, there was a knock on the door. Chloe answered it to find a young woman in a simple coat, looking terrified but determined. I need to speak to Vivian Sterling, the woman said, clutching her purse. Vivian came to the door. I'm Vivian. Who are you? My name is Amelia Hayes. I was Julian Sterling's executive assistant. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and conviction. I saw what you did today, what you said in court. It was the truth. He fired me last week as purging everyone he thinks knows too much. But he doesn't know what I know. Amelia took a deep breath. They're liars. The whole company is a lie. They kept a second set of books, Mrs. Sterling. A whole different accounting system on a private off-network server. It has everything. The real numbers, the real losses, the emails about the bribes. Everything. I know because I helped set it up. I have the passwords. She looked directly at Vivian, her voice dropping to a whisper. They tried to destroy you for telling the truth. I think it's time you had the evidence to destroy them with it. The information from Amelia was not merely a key. It was a battering ram. The hidden server, codenamed Icarus, with a tragic lack of self-awareness, was a digital tomb containing the complete, unvarnished history of the Sterling's deceit. Diana Finch's sleek midtown office transformed into a command center, a nerve hub buzzing with a controlled, ferocious energy. The glass-walled conference room, usually reserved for placid corporate negotiations, became a war room papered with flow charts and timelines. The scent of stale coffee and militant purpose hung in the air. Vivian spent days there, a silent partner to the storm of activity. She watched as Diana's hand-picked team of forensic accountants, their faces illuminated by the glow of spreadsheets, meticulously dissected the data. They were digital archaeologists, unearthing years of buried crimes. They found coded ledgers that detailed secret payments to auditors disguised as consulting fees. They unearthed frantic email chains between Julian and his CFO, panicked discussions about how to creatively recategorize the 9-figure losses from the failing AI venture ahead of quarterly reports. Most damning of all were the communications from Eleonora. Her emails were not the rants of a concerned mother, but the cold, calculating directives of a mob boss. She wrote of the need to prune the dead branches and ensure the purity of the Sterling Monroe succession. In one particularly chilling memo regarding the merger, she advised Julian that the dissolution of your current unfortunate entanglement must be handled with surgical precision to avoid sooking the markets and our new partners. She wasn't just an accessory to the fraud. She was its architect. She called your marriage an entanglement. Diana said, her voice a low thrum of fury, as she and Vivian looked over the printout one evening. The rest of the team had gone home, leaving the two women alone amidst the damning evidence. Vivian traced the words with her finger. To her, that's all it ever was. A temporary inconvenience. All this time I thought I was failing to live up to her standards. The truth is, I never stood a chance. The position was already promised to someone else. This evidence ensures they will fail to live up to the standards of the federal justice system. Diana countered her expression hard as granite. This goes beyond shareholder fraud, Vivian. This is conspiracy. Racketeering. We have enough here to not only destroy their company, but to ensure neither of them sees the outside of a courtroom and then a prison cell for a very long time. Diana paused, her gaze softening slightly as she looked at Vivian. The question remains, what is your end game? Do you want to see them in jail? Vivian looked out the vast window at the glittering expanse of Manhattan. She thought of the child growing inside her, a life untainted by this venom. Vengeance felt hot and satisfying, but it was a fire that could consume everything, including herself. Justice, however, was different. It was cold, clean, and final. Jail is the state's business, Vivian said, finally turning back to Diana. My business is my son. I don't want him growing up visiting his father in prison. But I also will not allow him to be a part of that family. I want to sever the ties. Completely. I want to build a fortress around him that not even the Sterling name can penetrate. I want to erase them from his life before it even begins. Diana nodded, a slow, predatory smile touching her lips. A fortress. I can build that. A fortress with walls so high and foundations so deep, they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to see over them. The call came 2 days later. It was Eleonora. Her voice, usually so imperious and controlled, was thin and brittle over the speakerphone in Diana's office. She requested a meeting. A private family discussion to resolve this unfortunate matter with dignity. There will be no discussion, Eleonora. Diana replied, her voice like ice. We will, however, grant you an audience. My client and I will meet you at the penthouse tomorrow at noon. You will be there with your son. No one else. No lawyers. Am I understood? There was a choked sound on the other end of the line before a faint yes. The call ended. The next morning, as Vivian prepared to walk back into the lion's den, she stood before the mirror in the secure apartment. She no longer saw a frightened, heartbroken woman. She saw a general on the morning of a decisive battle. She chose her armor with care, a simple, elegant black dress that didn't hide her pregnancy, but framed it as a source of power. Her hair pulled back severely, her face bearing only minimal makeup. She was not there to appeal to them, but to pass sentence. The doorman. Michael looked at her with wide, sorrowful eyes as she entered the building, Diana by her side. "Good to see you, Mrs. Ma'am?" he stammered. "It's good to see you too, Michael," she said, giving him a small, reassuring smile. The penthouse, once a symbol of suffocating opulence, now felt like a mausoleum. A profound silence hung in the air, thick and heavy with failure. A thin layer of dust coated the sterile white surfaces. The grand windows, which once offered a triumphant view of the city, now seemed to look out upon a kingdom they had lost. Eleonora and Julian were waiting in the living room, standing like two statues in a forgotten museum. The change in them was shocking. Julian was a husk. His expensive suit hung off a frame that had shed 20 pounds of arrogance and muscle. His face was sallow, his eyes were sunken and haunted, and he couldn't seem to stop a slight tremor in his right hand. He stared at a spot on the floor, just to the left of Vivian, unable to meet her gaze. Eleonora was a masterpiece of denial. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her makeup immaculately applied, but the mask couldn't hide the frantic panic in her eyes, or the death grip she had on her own hands, her knuckles white. She was a queen, presiding over the ruins of her own reign. "Thank you for coming, Vivian." Eleonora began, her voice straining for a civility that was grotesque under the circumstances. "I felt it was important we speak woman to woman. I am not here to speak, Eleonora. I am here to listen to you accept our terms." Diana Finch interrupted, her voice cutting through the tense air like a blade. She placed her leather briefcase on the massive glass coffee table with a definitive thud that made both Sterlings jump. "You have wasted enough of my client's time with your games. The time for talk is over." Julian flinched, as if struck. Finally, his eyes lifted and met Vivian's. They were filled with a desperate swimming pool of self-pity. "Vivian, I never meant for all this. I am so sorry." The apology was a puff of smoke, meaningless and empty. It was the sorry of a man who was sorry he got caught. "Are you, Julian?" Vivian asked, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of every lie, every betrayal. "Are you sorry you pushed me? Or are you sorry I didn't just fall and disappear? Are you sorry for the lies, or just that they stopped working? Your apology is 6 weeks and $1 billion too late. It's worthless. I was trying to protect the company." He began, the pathetic excuse dying on his lips as he saw the utter contempt in her eyes. "You were trying to protect yourself," she stated. "You built this entire life, our marriage, our future on a foundation of fraud. You didn't just lie to your investors. Our whole life was the lie. I was your prop, and this baby—" She rested a hand on her stomach. "This baby was to be your alibi, until you found a better deal." With that, Diana opened her briefcase. She extracted a single slim folder and slid it across the table. "Here is our settlement offer. It is not a negotiation. It is a decree. You will read it and you will sign it. You have 1 hour to have your lawyers review it and advise you to accept. My advice to them is to do so." Eleonora snatched the document. Julian read over her shoulder, his breath hitching. The color drained from Eleonora's face as she read the terms, her carefully constructed composure shattering with each paragraph. It was a systematic dismantling of their power. The immediate uncontested divorce was expected. The financial settlement was not. Vivian was not asking for cash. She was demanding a controlling interest in the Sterling family's tangible, non-corporate assets, the art collection valued at over $200 million, the portfolio of historic real estate properties in New York and London, and in a move of pure poetic justice, the charter and endowment of the Sterling Foundation itself, which Vivian intended to reshape in her own image. Then came the terms regarding the child. Sole legal and physical custody. Julian's name was to be legally expunged from the birth certificate. The child's surname would be Vance. Julian would have 0 parental rights. The restraining order was permanent, a legal wall 1,000 miles high. No, Eleonora whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "This is monstrous. You will not steal my grandson. You will not erase the Sterling name, your grandson." Vivian's voice was lethal. "This child stopped being your grandson the moment you wrote a memo calling his mother an entanglement to be dissolved. He is not a Sterling. He will be a Vance. He will be raised with love, not leverage. With integrity, not avarice. He will be everything your family is not. You will not touch him. You will not see him. He will never know your poison. You can't do this." Julian finally burst out a surge of impotent fury, animating his hollow frame. "He is my son, Diana." Finch leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Right now, Mr. Sterling, he is the only thing standing between you and a federal indictment for conspiracy securities fraud and racketeering. Because this offer has one final term." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single piece of paper, a printout of the most damning email from the Icarus server, the one from Eleonora, detailing the plan to cleanse the family line. She slid it across the table. "In exchange for your full, immediate, and silent compliance," Diana said softly, "the full contents of that server remain a private matter. My client has no interest in seeing the father of her child imprisoned. But make no mistake, if you fight us, if you hesitate, if you so much as breathe a word of this to the press, a copy of that entire server, along with a sworn affidavit from your former assistant. Amelia will be on the desk of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York before lunch. You will lose your company, your fortune, your reputation, and your freedom. Checkmate." The room was utterly silent, the weight of the ultimatum pressing down, suffocating them. Eleonora Sterling looked at the email, her own treacherous words staring back at her. She looked at her son, his face a mask of abject terror, the pathetic, broken end product of her ambition. And she looked at Vivian, no longer the malleable girl she had tried to discard, but a righteous, immovable force of nature. She had to choose. Her pride, the Sterling name, the legacy she had worshipped her entire life, or her son's freedom. A single tear, hot and furious, finally escaped the corner of her eye, tracing a path through her expensive foundation. Her shoulders slumped in the final, shuddering agony of defeat. Her voice was a ragged whisper. "We accept." Vivian's journey from a humiliated wife to an empowered architect of her own destiny is a powerful reminder that sometimes being pushed out is the only way to find where you're truly meant to stand. She took their cruelty and forged it into a weapon for justice, not just for herself, but for the child she was determined to raise in a better world. But what do you think? Was her revenge total and justified, or did she go too far by taking their son away completely? Could you have found it in your heart to forgive? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and righteous victory resonated with you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that prove truth is always more compelling than fiction.